You co-sign the loan on a Tuesday afternoon in a credit union off Route 30, mostly because your friend Alex asked, and you'd already said yes before you'd really thought it through. Alex found a duplex 2 blocks from the hospital where he works nights, needed a second income on the application to qualify, and you had the credit score and nothing better to do with it. You're not moving in, you're not putting money down, you're a name on a piece of paper, a favor with your signature on it. And you figure that's the end of your involvement. It isn't. 6 weeks after closing, Alex calls you on a Sunday, half annoyed, half amused, because the tenant in the other unit just texted him about a leaking faucet, and Alex doesn't know how to shut off the water main. You drive over, more out of curiosity than obligation, and while you're under the sink with a wrench, you start asking Alex questions you didn't plan to ask. What's the mortgage? What's the rent on the other unit? What Alex is actually netting once you subtract everything. He doesn't know the second number off the top of his head, which surprises you, because you'd assumed owning a property meant you automatically understood what it was doing for you. You go home and run the numbers yourself, using the little information Alex gave you. The other unit rents for $1,450. The mortgage, taxes, and insurance combined come to $1,780. Alex is covering the gap out of his own paycheck every month, which he hadn't really registered as a gap because he lives in the other unit, so in his head, he's just paying his rent, even though his rent is technically negative. That's the detail that sticks with you. Not that Alex is losing money exactly, because he's building equity and living somewhere he'd be paying for anyway. It's that nobody had ever explained the difference to him between owning a property and understanding what it produces. You'd co-signed a loan without ever asking that question about your own life either. 3 months later, you find your own duplex. A beat-up place on the other side of town with 2 one-bedroom units, listed by a widow whose late husband had rented it out himself for 20 years and never raised the rent because he didn't need the money and didn't like conflict. You pay $187,000 for it, which even you know is under market, because the numbers on paper are so unremarkable that nobody else at the open house seemed interested. You move into the smaller unit. You rent the larger one to a school teacher named Priya for $1,100 a month. This is the part nobody tells you about house hacking. It doesn't feel like an investment. It feels like you're just living somewhere slightly worse than you could otherwise afford, with a stranger's rent check covering most of your mortgage. Your friends who rent nice one-bedrooms downtown don't understand why you're in a 900-square-foot unit with original 1970s cabinetry. You don't explain it well when they ask. You just say it's temporary, even though you're not entirely sure that's true. Your accountant, a guy named Philip who does taxes out of a strip mall office with a fake ficus in the corner, is the first person who says the actual number out loud. Depreciation, he tells you, going through your return the first year. You're writing off a portion of the building's value every year against the rental income, on top of the mortgage interest, on top of the actual cash flow, which is modest but real. He shows you the total tax benefit, and it's larger than you expected. Large enough that your effective return on the property, once you account for everything, isn't the small number you assumed from the rent check alone. Philip doesn't say it like a revelation, he says it like a weather report. You write it down anyway, the way you used to write down car payment due dates. Alex sells his duplex 18 months later, not because it failed, but because he never understood it well enough to feel good about owning it. And a realtor's cold email offering slightly over asking was enough to make him take the exit. You don't try to talk him out of it. You do the math on what he walks away with after the sale, the loan payoff, the closing costs, and it's a decent number, but a fraction of what it would have been if he'd held it another 5 years, while a tenant paid down his mortgage for him. You don't say any of that. Some things you only get to understand by living through them, not by being told. You buy your second property the following spring, a triplex this time, in a part of town that's starting to turn over, 3 units instead of 2 for $340,000. You don't have that in cash. You use a home equity line against the first duplex, which has appreciated more than you expected, plus a conventional loan for the rest. You move nothing about your own living situation. You still live in the small unit in the first duplex. You just now own 2 properties and manage 5 rent checks a month, 4 of which come from other people, and 1 of which, technically, comes from you. A cousin you haven't spoken to in years calls out of nowhere in the fall, mentions she heard you're doing real estate now, and asks if you'd consider partnering with her on a 4-plex she found online, one she can't qualify for on her own. You listen for 20 minutes. At a co-worker's barbecue that August, someone asks what you've been up to, and you say you own a couple of rental properties, which is true, and also somehow undersells the last 2 years entirely. Nobody follows up. It's not an interesting sentence the way a promotion or a new car is an interesting sentence. The numbers don't work. Not because the property is bad, but because she hasn't run any of the numbers herself. She's run the dream instead. The version where owning more units automatically means more money. Without the vacancy assumptions, the maintenance reserve, the property management cost, if she ever wants her weekends back. You don't tell her no outright. You ask her to pull the actual operating expenses from the listing agent and get back to you. She never does. You don't bring it up again. You still co-sign things for friends sometimes, though more carefully now. You know what a signature actually commits you to. You know the difference between owning something and understanding it, because you learned it standing under Alex's kitchen sink with a wrench, doing math he hadn't thought to do about his own life. There's no photo to take. Your actual life, most Tuesdays, is still just you, in a 900 square foot unit with old cabinetry, checking whether Priya's rent cleared and fixing a faucet occasionally when a tenant texts. 2 properties, 5 units, rent checks that mostly cover themselves, and then some. Nobody's impressed by it at a barbecue. Nobody's supposed to be. What does the 4th property look like? And who's it going to house?